it left me feeling depressed, distressed. It left me feeling like there was something wrong with me. When the reality is there was something wrong with the people around me who saw what they perceived to be feminine behavior or a feminine expression of gender as being unacceptable for somebody who was presenting as male. And of course, nowadays, being a 9.5 years into since I began my transition from male to female, it definitely, I am still held in some circles as being wrong, that there is something wrong with me for being transsexual. So even let me put it this way. This past week here, in April of 2012, the EEOC, which is the government agency that processes equal opportunity claims and things of that notion, Title VII violations, that they just ruled this week that transgender people are protected under Title VII, under these sex discrimination rules, or what's the term they use? Because of sex stereotyping. In other words, they associated certain clothing and behavior with masculine and feminine. And if you are under Price Waterhouse, sex stereotyping was prohibited. It was a court ruling in the late 80s, early 90s, where a woman who was presenting quote-unquote too masculinely at work was ruled by the Supreme Court to have been discriminated against specifically because of gender. And Title VII is what provided protections, or Title VII now is what provides protection for folk using that same concept of it's against the law to do sex stereotyping. And since then, there's been a number of transsexuals who've had their case go to court, and some of that have been ruled, early on, they were being ruled against, saying that transgender folk were not in a protected class, that transsexuals are not protected under Title VII. Well, recently in the past few years, there was a firefighter in Ohio who was a male to female transsexual, and instead of saying I'm protected because I'm a transsexual, they made the case that when they were harassed and then I believe eventually fired, that they were the victim of sex stereotyping. And they won that case in, I believe, the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals. Or was it the 8th Circuit Court of Appeals? I'm not sure which is the one, but they basically won the case. And since then, there's been numerous rulings, such as the Diane Shore case in the D.C. area, where the federal government was perceived to be discriminating against somebody who was getting the job as a transsexual, or was being hired as male, stated I'm going to transition from male to female, and then was literally said we no longer want you for the job, specifically because they were transsexual, and she won the case based on sex stereotyping. Well, since then, again, the EEOC ruling basically has come down, where the recent court rulings have come down and stated that discrimination against transsexuals is discrimination based on sex stereotyping. In other words, we perceive them to be male, or some people perceive transsexuals to be male, and since they're perceived to be male and they're presenting as female, because it's almost always the trans women who this is happening to, and not so much the trans men, although it does happen to trans men, it's more frequent with trans women, that they're not getting jobs, that they're being fired specifically under, and they're having no protections. Well, the EEOC has now ruled that that's unlawful, that they will actually bring suit. Well, they will begin actions and even possibly bring suit. And this case was won by the Transgender Law Center, which is out of San Francisco, California. The bottom line is that in all of these kind of things, I wouldn't have been protected if the EEOC rulings were in place, because it doesn't protect transgender people. But we have the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which is a federal law that's been attempted to be passed into law since, my gosh, the 70s and 80s were the first versions of this submitted, and have not been able to do it. And most Americans think that gays and lesbians and bisexual people at least are protected by federal law, and folk are actually surprised, most folk are actually surprised to find out they're not. And short of Employment Non-Discrimination Act, trans people being protected under sex stereotyping rules is a major move forward. And it will protect people from experiencing the same kind of harassment and discrimination that I experienced in the military, even though it won't protect military members at this point. But it is one of those strange kind of things now, because the federal government is now stating that discriminations against trans people is not lawful, but that now leaves lesbian, gays, and bisexuals having less protection than trans people, which is kind of a turn of events, because most of the initial laws were based on sexual orientation, and they left gender identity and gender expression out of the protections, or anti-discrimination protections. So times have changed, and it's a good thing for trans people. But just because the EEOC says you can't do it doesn't mean it still won't happen. It just may be more subtle instead of overt, like it was in this recent case that the Transgender Law Center presented to the EEOC and won.
Hi, I'm Christy Mansfield. I'm a registered nurse at a large hospital here in San Diego and a mother of two.
Tell us about your upbringing.
I was raised in a very traditional Christian family, right-wing conservative. Was taught that the only options for me was to be heterosexual. Never even considered another option until I was 45 years old. And at that point, I explored some other options, discovered I'm a lesbian. That's turned out great for me. The kids that I'm raising are both very supportive, good with it, and have been wonderful. My traditional family, the family I was raised with, is not on board, have not spoken much with them since it, but hopefully that's a work in progress. I've been a registered nurse for 20 years. I've worked at a large hospital here in the San Diego area for 15 of those, and have had no trouble in my employment. Everything's gone great. When I came out, they were supportive at work, and everybody seemed fine with it. About 6 months after I came out at work, I was called into my manager's office. My supervisor was there and my manager was there, and was, in a nutshell, told that I was being too gay, not too gay, maybe too gay at work, and that I needed to be, not to talk about my relationship. I needed to be careful not to touch anybody at work, and that I wasn't supposed to call anybody honey or dear or those types of things we do when we communicate with other people. When I touch people at work, it might be a pat on the back, how you doing, or excuse me, coming through, hand on the shoulder, but I've never been attracted to anybody at work, never made advances on anybody at work, never had any issues with that before. It put me in a place when they told me that about the touching thing, it put me in a very awkward situation to where people would come up and offer me a hug, and I would stiffen because I don't want to get in trouble, or it just was not a good place to be. Everybody hugs, everybody gives pats on the back. Some people rub people's shoulders. I've never been a shoulder rubber at work, but I've seen it a lot. We're healthcare professionals. We're very comfortable being hands-on with other people, and again, nothing's changed in the way I relate to my coworkers or my patients over the last 15 years that I've been there. The only thing that's changed is that I'm a lesbian, and they know it. So for the first time in my career, I've been a nurse for 20 years. I do a good job, I show up on time, I work hard, I'm good with my patients, my coworkers seem to like me. But for the first time in 20 years, I fear for the loss of my job. I've thought about how to come back at them or deal with this, but without the fear of retaliation or losing my job, it's been stressful. If I were to be fired for being gay, I'm the sole support of the financial means for myself and my two children, and it would be devastating. completely devastating. There would be no health care, no income. I definitely could not pay my bills. So after dealing with the amount of stress and fearing for my job, I went through several options in my mind. Getting a lawyer, not doing anything and just trying to go along and be quiet, not noticed as much. But I had to stand up for myself. So I familiarized myself with the California policy of non-discrimination. I also looked up, my company has a policy that is specific to non-discrimination based on sexual orientation. I called a meeting. I brought in my human resources department, called a meeting to order with my supervisor and my manager, and had the policies in front of me, explained to the human resources person who wasn't there the first time what had happened in the last meeting, and that if I'm not allowed to talk about my relationship, then neither is anybody else. They pointed out to me that that's the policy anyway. I pointed out to them that may be true, but we all know that's not what happens, and I'm not going to be singled out. And they had to ultimately admit that I was right and that I am allowed to talk to my relationship. And then they tried to say, well, you need to be careful. Some people are less comfortable than others with homosexuality. And I pointed out to them that may be true, but some people are less comfortable with others than being black. Some people are less comfortable with others for having curly hair, being overweight, whatever it is. They need to leave that at the door. If I'm talking in the same general terms about my relationship, whether it be a homosexual relationship or not, and other people are allowed to do, we all have to be allowed to do the same thing. I live in California, which is a progressive, forward-thinking state. In that respect, I'm fortunate because California does have a policy of non-discrimination based on sexual orientation. Gave me the strength and the backup to go in and be able to have this discussion with my managers and my supervisor. Unfortunately, if I didn't live in California, in 26 other states, there's no protection, there's no backup. If they wanted to say, you're gay, sorry, you gotta go, I'd have to go, and that would be it. Also, as I understand it, within the federal employees, there's no law that protects them. There is a directive that's not followed very well, and they don't have those same types of protections. And that's why ENDA is so important. If we can get a law like that passed, then everyone will have the ability to handle these things, to self-advocate, stand up, have the law on their side, and we could all just work together, work in peace. People could leave their homophobia at home, just like people have to leave racism at home.
My name is Bruce Abrams. I'm the chair of the City of San Diego's Human Relations Commission. To my right is Commissioner Joyce Abrams, who served on the commission as long as I have. To my left is Gangadeep Kaur, who has served for the last year and a half on the city's Human Relations Commission.